New project, but not that. Got a 89 4-wheel steering. Be doing an H22 swap on it for someone. It's pretty clean. It's pretty much all stock except for the wheels. So it isn't automatic, but it's going to be swapped to manual. And as far as I can tell, all the paint's original except for, well, sorry, all the paint's original except, and the body's in good shape except for one spot. Unfortunately, that's the worst thing on the door. Otherwise, it's a little bit dirty with it. It's a nice car. So first thing I'm going to do is jack up one end at a time and kind of sneak under there with the pressure washer and just go blast off anything I can. Although just looking at the wheel wells, you see they exposed. I think someone's already been through here with the pressure washer because that's what happens. You can blast off the stock black stuff pretty easy. Anyways, I'm going to try that just to clean it up. I'll get it in the garage and start working. There's the engine that's going in it. It's a Euro R H22. Euro R manifold. It's made it to a T2W4 LSD trans. Alright, it's time. Now, this isn't going to be a standard swap. What I'm doing on the swap is the same thing I did with my black Prelude back about 10 years ago, where it's going to be custom mounted as far back and as high up as possible for ground clearance. And that'll involve cutting away some of this support under the hood, and the rear subframe is going to get a chunk taken out of it around where the diff sits, so the whole thing can go back further. And unlike that time, this time the owner of the car wants low vibrations, so what I'm going to try to do is leave the stock V28 mounts in the car and just build new brackets to come off the trans and engine to mate up to the stock mounts. That'll have low vibrations, and in the future, if it's too loose, you can always put window weld in the mounts or fill them. Well, that's the plan right now. So I gotta get all this out. So he has K Sports already. He's got the full fast brakes bullwood brake kit, and for the knuckles, he's actually over there has the 9091 knuckles with the larger hubs. So basically, all this is coming out. I'm going to be recoating his wheel wells, and it's a good thing the fast brake kit comes with new lines, because you can see. This is why I normally just replace brake lines on old cars I buy, just like immediately, because if they're not doing it already. 30-year-old lines are going to start doing it real soon. So just go straight to braided. There's a few little things like torn boots that take care of. Alright, that's it for tonight. Tomorrow I'll clean the engine bay, pull the extra stuff that needs to come out, and start the fab work. Just pulled the steering rack and subframe. I'm going to swap in the modded subframe. Alright, so there may be a change of plans as far as the engine transmission setup goes. So I'm stopping that for now. I'm going to switch over to doing the brakes and suspension. Alright, here's where I'm at. Got the front wheel wells done. And did the underbody all the way up, just up to the gas tank. I'm going to save the rear of the car until later, until I figure out exactly what's going on with this. But I know for sure I got to do all this, so I just went ahead and did it. Alright, I got the final parts I need before I put the suspension and brakes together, the front wheel bearings. Because on this 9091 knuckle, the bearing on the side is totally shot. The other side's okay, but you know, might as well do them both at the same time. But what I think I'm going to do is the older knuckles are in a little bit nicer shape, so I'm just going to pull the hubs from these ones and put it in the old knuckles. Alright, bearings are installed, and I painted the knuckle. Now I'm going to start putting the front suspension back together using the K-Sports and the fast brakes. Got the rear of the car undercoated. I'm going to clean up the four-wheel steering gearbox, especially stuff like this where it's got really heavy oxidation. It's pretty common under these bushings. And I'm going to repaint that rear subframe. And they ordered new bushings for back here to replace these. Alright, it's got the rear subframe and four-wheel steering gearbox back together. It's pretty much all refreshed. Alright, I got the hood marked where I'm going to cut it. Yeah, this section is for the valve cover. Over here is for the distributor. And so the way to do this, use one of these. But if you just try to cut it like it is, the sparks that fly on the inside and hit the back side of the hood, they'll like superheat it and you'll get bubbling paint. So first step is I laid it on a wet towel, and then before I cut, I'm going to fill this in a very thin layer of water, and that'll stop that from happening. There's the cutting. Now I just need to deburr these edges, put some primer on it. It's ready to go back on the car. Here's what I got done today. So once I got the engine where I wanted it, I made some temporary solid mounts for the sides, and I've just worked out the rear, the final form of the rear. This is the result of cutting the webbing. I just hit it with white primer, and it's not a perfect match, but it doesn't look too out of place. Here And the hood shut. So I get the camera up in here. Yeah, so there's still room. So I can also test it. Doesn't hit the engine. Since this swap is using rubber mounts, I've added a little bit more clearance than the swap I've done previously on my own car where I used the poly mounts. I just have to account for the engine rocking a little bit easier with these mounts. Also got the 99.3 Accord half shaft and axles fit, test fit, and they seem to like don't work. This one's the one that's kind of short, but there's still room for it to move into the hub, so should be okay. Alright, for the left side mount, I'm looking at how, so if I want to use stock pieces and the H22 block bracket, it looks like I would need pretty big spacers there. Like 1.5 inch at least. So what I think I might do is maybe cut this off and do the same on the B20 bracket and weld the B20 bracket onto here. Can't really adapt this to fit on the H22 block because this, you know, I've never taken one of these apart. This side mount is really complicated. It's got bolts coming from the side, 3 in the bottom, this little piece up here. It's got this going over here for the timing cover. So I think I'm just gonna weld part of this onto that. Took a little while to get all the clearances right, but there's the 3rd gen mount bracket attached to the H22. And all I have to do is do a little bit of clearancing for the support here on the lower cover. Other than that, it all fits up like stock, so it should be sealed really well. There's the left side setup, and all said and done, I wound up adding 1/2 inch spacers under these mount bolts. Once it all gets repowder coated, basically the same as this, like a semi-gloss black, all this should look pretty stock. Alright, so I marked this one to modify it, but at the same time I'm just going to use the one I had on my Prelude. So it's pretty much where it needs to be anyways. You can see this is where I'd cut it and welded a new piece to lower it, this area for compressor clearance. My swap, I used poly mounts. This is obviously rubber mounts, so we'll see. This might touch down in there, so I may either need to try to clearance this more or increase the thickness of these spacers a little bit, but we'll see. Same thing for my modified radius rod. Pulley clearance, I ground out kind of like a divot on the other side to clear this, and I welded on some extra bracing. And this is at, there's like a 1/16 of an inch clearance still. This is at full compression with the upper arm touching the inside of the fender. And the car has never be that low anyway, so clearance on that will be great. The quality of these aftermarket mounts is kind of pretty bad. I had to enlarge these holes 2 sizes to get them, they just weren't in the right spot. I had to grind this down on both sides because it's wider than the stock mount. And then I had to run a drill, 1/2 inch drill through here because otherwise the bolt, there's rubber in there and the bolt just wouldn't go through. And even as it's gone through, it's slightly crooked. That's okay because it's rubber, it'll account for that. This is what we're living with these days. So the side mounts are being a bit more complicated because this is basically in the way of the automatic stock mount and the manual stock mount. Either one would hit this. So I'm relocating an automatic one all the way out here, which requires a little bit of complication. That'll go on there. Now I just need to make the bracket for the trans. And the only thing with that is I gotta make sure that when that one is installed, there's enough room to pull this off and up so it stays serviceable. Alright, that's about how it's gonna look. That's final form. So need to add a little bit of bracing. And that bolt back in the rear is really close, so I'm going to switch that to an Allen head. But again, there's just enough room to get this in and out. Let's make it easy to service. This is the trans mount. And I probably will still clearance the chassis just a little bit right there to that bolt. Although there is clearance, I'm just, because of the rubber mounts, I gotta constantly think about the whole engine kind of shifting a little bit while you're driving. It might touch stuff, make noises. Here's the front mount. The only tight spot is I had to make this kind of low just so there's room to get this bolt out. And I noticed the actual mount is really close to the header tube. I may need to grind this mount down a little bit. I'm gonna hold off on that because I need to adjust. Basically, if you look at the ground clearance, the header tubes hang way under the oil pan, which is just, I don't know why they designed these headers like that, but they're all like that. So I'm going to shorten all these tubes, and that'll allow these to slip up further up to take care of that ground clearance. And after I do that, then I'll see what it looks like here, or whether it needs to be trimmed or not. Yeah, here you can see the problem. There's so much room. It's roughly 1 inch. And if you look from the side, can't really do anything about this, but this pipe's much further forward than that, so this is the one that's going to take the hit if it gets hit. Other problems, you see where the O2 is? Well, this car's going to have the skid bar, and that's going to be right in the way, so that's got to, I'll probably cut it somewhere here and rotate it, and add a second bung for like a wideband. And this is going to go away as well, because that sucks. I'm going to add a flex section and a V-band on the end. And another thing, a lot of aftermarket headers do this, is they don't use any rear block support like the stock header. And if you do that, what eventually will happen is the tubes where they attach to the head flange, they'll start cracking, just because there's so much weight here that slightly moves constantly while you're driving, and eventually it just cracks. So I'll make a bracket to tie into those. Alright, here's what it looks like after taking 1 inch off all these. It's much better. I can barely get I can't really get my pinky in there. And so the little bit of the gap is good because I want to put some heat barrier around the tubes, right where it runs under the oil pan. So I need a small gap there. That's much better. Be way more drivable. Gets pretty close in here, but there's still some clearance, so it won't be vibrating or anything. And because I moved up so far, the little piece like this that was going on here, I had to cut it off because it got in the way, so I got to weld it up higher. And after that, it should be ready to assemble. Right, I'm pretty much done with the downpipe and the skid bar. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah, so I made the block bracket. I have the second O2 in case he wants to use a wideband. Made the hangers and added the flex section. There's a clearance I made in here. And for the skid bar, I added 1/2-inch spacers, and then I added this piece right here to hang just a little bit lower than the downpipe, so that will give it some skid protection. And just in here, I ground this down slightly right here because it's kind of close. Otherwise, it fits pretty good. And I just added his high flow cat onto the exhaust, or starting the exhaust, and now I gotta. Next it'll probably be this piece, and then after that this, and then for the rest of the, like the bends and stuff, he has like a true bends exhaust. So that'll do the bends here, and there's another vibrant muffler for the rear. Making progress on the exhaust. Put the resonators in and the muffler hollow, so I just gotta connect them. Alright, the exhaust is finished. Added a V-band there to make it a little bit easier to deal with. Alright, more parts came in. Got this 3-point tower bar for the front and a 2-point for the rear from these guys. I don't know how to pronounce it. But in addition to the bars, the owner also bought these from them as well. It's supposed to be the whole poly bushing kit for the car. I haven't heard of anyone using these, so pretty cool to check it out, see how it all fits. Alright, I'm working on the upper arm poly bushings, and it looks like these are different than like the Super Pro ones. They're one piece, so I gotta somehow force this through that hole, get it seated. See how it goes. And there's a replacement ball joint boots for the whole kit. Alright, all the rear bushings are done. Fit was pretty okay. On these ones, I actually had to shave down one side a little bit because it's just a little bit. It was more than a little bit. It was too tight to go into this fork. I checked it on the stock shock too, and it's the same deal. So the bushing was just slightly wide. The rest of them went out in okay. All I had to do on these is they're molded as one piece, but they're supposed to be split. So I had to put a split down the center of it, just like the stock bushing. Alright, I'm going to be Cerakoting the header and the exhaust. The owner chose Glacier Forge for the header and titanium for the exhaust. We'll see how that turns out. Here's a Cerakote forge. I think it looks pretty good. Next up is the exhaust. Exhaust coating is done.